Dr. Murray Bowen is a family counselor who had a specific approach to doing family counseling that grew from psychodynamic and psychoanalytic ways of being with families. He also thought a lot about his own family of origin, the family that he grew up with, and incorporated his ideas and beliefs and experiences from being a young boy in his family and then later an adult boy, an adult man, into his theory of family counseling. So, some things that are kind of interesting about him would be that he's the oldest of five children, or he was the oldest of five children. He was an active duty in World War II and originally was interested in surgery, but later switched to psychiatry. And his main emphasis was studying families with schizophrenia initially. He did a little bit of work in Richmond, Virginia, and he also lived in Maryland, so not too far off from where we are in North Carolina. A major premise of his model of doing family counseling is that the family is the primary emotional system to which we belong and thereby continually shapes and determines the course of our lives. So, a big thing for Murray Bowen is that unresolved emotional issues from our own growing up experiences in our own families of origin will continue to have an impact on us throughout our lives. He also believed that if one person in a family changes and is able to maintain emotional connections with other people, then those other people will eventually have to make changes too. This idea is really important because it says that it is possible to do family work without all of the family members present. And not all schools of thought on family counseling will believe that idea right there. But Murray Bowen says if we can get one family member in the room and they're able to maintain what they learn out of family counseling, uh, if, if we're doing family work through individual counseling, but with this family approach, then when they go back into their interactions with those other family members, even though they were not physically present in the therapy room, then those family members will by necessity end up having to make changes themselves because that one family member has changed, the one who came to counseling. That's an important thing to remember. He also thought it was really important to look at family life cycles and see how patterns develop over time and continue to play themselves out. So I hope that when you do your own genograms, that's something that you will start to get in touch with, whether or not that bears out to be the case in your own family. So we'll talk more specifically about genograms, but just noting here on this final bullet point, the whole purpose of the genogram is to understand family history, to be able to figure out where those dysfunctional patterns are continuing to play out generation after generation. And a lot of families will see that cycles of abuse or using emotional cutoffs as a way to deal with problems or substance abuse, those things will come up over and over again in a family's history. Murray Bowen, you need to become familiar with his terms, which would include fusion, where two family members, at least two family members, are so connected with each other that they're not able to be their own individuals. And so that's kind of fusion is usually considered to be a form of enmeshment, and it's too much closeness. A lack of differentiation is someone who is very impacted by emotionality. Murray Bowen thought that we need to make rational decisions, even though these family relationships are highly emotionally charged. If the more differentiated we are, then the more easily we can make those decisions without so much emotionality. He also believed that people tend to have high levels of anxiety that causes problems, and he was able to determine that a poor quality of relationships across multiple generations created dysfunction in families. So, like we saw in psychodynamic, psychoanalytic family work, the function of the symptoms, whatever those symptoms may be, serves to reduce anxiety. And you can help to reduce some anxiety by pulling in a third person and taking some of the strain off of two people that might be at odds with each other, or by doing what's called an emotional cutoff, which would be avoiding the person. So the symptoms are an attempt to try to reduce anxiety, and they arise when stress exceeds a person's current coping level or current coping coping level in a current relationship. So if you come into a relationship, then based on your family of origin, you've developed a set of coping skills. And now you may be in a new relationship with the family that you've created, your own nuclear family, or your own mother-in-law situation, or your own single parent family, whatever the family form may be. You're bringing to that some coping skills that you have developed over the course of your lifetime, which are heavily influenced by your own family of origin. And in your new family relationship, stress will occur when, well, symptoms will occur when the stress that's placed on that family, whether externally or internally, exceeds the level of coping skills that you have. And that becomes a real great opportunity to teach additional coping skills. And I believe that that's a very optimistic point of view, because it implies that people can learn new coping skills. Going a little bit further into fusion, you want to be familiar in your textbook about the undifferentiated ego mass, which is the emotional reactivity shared by all the family members. A universal tendency to some degree of fusion in a couple. That is, most couples, most romantic partners will come together and try to fuse in some way, and that can be a fine and healthy thing, but there can be a tipping point when it becomes too much. Fusion can also be related to incomplete differentiation from a family of origin. So you may be more prone to be in fused or enmeshed relationships if you have not really differentiated from your own family of origin. Couples will often use each other. The two romantic partners in a couple will use each other to finish unresolved work that they had with their parents. And that usually occurs on an unconscious level. And it's the counselor's role then to try to help bring that to the surface, to make it conscious, so that couples can relate to each other as they truly are, and not by projecting these former relationships with their parents and the unresolved issues of those onto their current partner. If that work is completed, then they're free to enter new relationships based on being who they are and be able to appreciate others for who they truly are. In the instructor video about psychodynamic family counseling, I referenced a Getting the Love You Want website that really hits heavy on this bullet point here, that when you do that your own work to differentiate from your family as an adult, it makes you a better partner for other people. Let's see. According to Bowen, fusion symptoms develop less problematic when leaving the relationship seems less problematic. So this is an interesting point. Cohabitating couples sometimes don't experience difficulties from fusion until after marriage. So there's something less permanent about the cohabitating relationship, that the negative aspects of fusion don't actually come up until after marriage, when the relationship intensifies. Bowen was very interested in the idea of distance and cutoffs as ways to solve problems or avoid problems. And emotional distance and cutoffs are the result of efforts to reduce anxiety related to excessive togetherness between generations. The goal is to reduce anxiety by having better control over emotional reactivity and increased differentiation. Increased fusion can lead to an increased chance of a cutoff. So if a mother and daughter relationship is very enmeshed, then there's a higher likelihood that as that daughter grows up and becomes an adult and wants to be more of her own independent person and less fused and enmeshed with her mother, that's an emotionally charged relationship. And unless that mother and daughter, now that they're both adults, can handle that greater degree of differentiation, then it's likely that there might end up being a cutoff, because the emotionality is so high that the only way to deal with that high emotionality and the resulting anxiety is for there to just be a cutoff. And unresolved conflicts and cutoffs lead to hurt, misunderstanding, anger, alienation, a sense of failure, and guilt. And these feelings can ripple through several generations. So the goal would be to repair, redefine, and reintegrate roles and relationships. For some people with very unhealthy relationships, being cut off from other family members can be a form of self-protection, can be a way to try to preserve their sense of self. Now, triangles are when a third party gets involved in a relationship and is a way to kind of take some of the anxiety off the first two parties in the relationship. So the anxiety fuels this need for emotional closeness or a greater need for distance. And when two people are having a problem and it gets hard to talk, sometimes one will turn and talk to a third person to take some of the pressure off. And if that's done in a positive way, that can be a big help. Sometimes it can be done in a negative way that causes intergenerational problems. And a good example of that might be a husband and wife are having their having arguments, and the husband decides to call his mother, and who is also his wife's mother-in-law, and start discussing their problems. And so he's kind of creating a new dyad. The mother-in-law is becoming triangulated in the relationship, and the two primary people are not dealing with that problem themselves. They're bringing in this third person who is not helping to solve the problem, potentially. But ideally, bringing in a third person can be a way to take some of the heat off the first two. So differentiation, I've mentioned that several times throughout this recording, and another way to think about differentiation is just to think about someone who is an emotionally mature person, and they have the ability to reflect and to negotiate instead of just reacting instinctively to problems and issues and things that come up. And there are a lot of problems and issues that come up in family life, so it's really important to be an emotionally mature person. It adds to a greater sense of emotional connectedness and to autonomy, being able to make own decisions. So unhealthy individuals, from Bowen's point of view, would be people who spend too much energy on togetherness. Their emotional boundaries between themselves and other people become blurred, and their thinking response to stress or problems is overwhelmed by their emotional response. These people tend to be very sensitive to emotional disharmony and the opinion of other people. By contrast, healthy individuals are considered to be those who are differentiated, and they're not overly affected by praise or criticism. They assume total responsibility for themselves. They process feelings on a more objective level. They use the intellect to overrule the emotional system as needed. They have a solid sense of themselves, and they have slowly formed but firmly held beliefs that can only be changed by the self and not by others through coercion or persuasion. So someone who just has a real strong sense of who they are would be considered a differentiated and healthy individual in Bowen's model. The primary goal of the family counseling is to help to create authentic and appropriate emotional expression in families. He really wants to emphasize connectedness among family members as being a blueprint for how people connect with other people in their lives. And he wants to, as much as possible, to try to get rid of unhealthy triangles. So increasing the ability of a client to manage their own anxiety in their current family has to in some way be done by increasing the ability to manage anxiety in their family of origin. The therapeutic process includes assessment, the promotion of differentiation, the determining where triangles are and getting rid of the unhealthy triangles, and focusing on facts rather than feelings. In this situation, the counselor tends to minimize stress and to create a very calm atmosphere. They do not try to ramp up emotion. They encourage self-reflection and understanding, and they act as a conduit for family communication to minimize emotionality. That's really key here, and no matter what model of family counseling that you practice, being able to, at times, be a conduit for family communication is very helpful. And a conduit means that as a way to keep emotional levels down, information is passed from one family member to the counselor and then back to the other family member. So the information flows through the family counselor to try to bring the emotional levels down. There's a great way to think about a Bowen counselor is that it's the idea of a master teacher from Buddhist thought, not confirming but holding the student accountable without praise. and being a coach on the sidelines with the big picture in mind. There are several really important techniques. We're going to focus on genograms, and you can read